So compatriots, Nigeria's call obey to serve our fatherland with love and strength and faith. Thy labor of our heroes past shall never be in vain. To serve with heart and might, one nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the board, management, and staff of Union Bank, I welcome you to this centenary event. We are celebrating 100 years of heritage and service. It's not easy in an environment like this to last 100 years and still have your head above water. And you probably have all heard about our Doubting Thomas series on radio, which is we have proved that we have changed, we have evolved, we have built a simpler, smarter bank, and we think it is worth celebrating our evolution. That's why we're here today. We thank you for coming to share with us this morning our rich history and heritage. We thank you for being here to listen to some of what we'll be offering you today. Some thoughts for the next century. Union Bank, simple, smarter bank. Welcome to all of you. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased to send greetings to all those attending Union Bank of Nigeria's 100th anniversary celebration. I commend Union Bank on its call to action and its commitment to making a positive impact as it continues to build on innovation and sustainability. I also applaud the bank's aspiration to take a leadership role in driving the SDGs to galvanize private sector support in Nigeria towards achieving the goals. As you look back on your journey through a century of business, while also looking ahead, I hope you will find both inspiration and opportunity in the 2030 Agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These interlinked and interdependent global goals are the successor to the Millennium Development Goals and provide a pathway to sustainable development. They aim to end extreme poverty, fight inequality and injustice, and protect our planet. This ambitious agenda is a very powerful framework for economic transformation. As a bank whose operations span a century, I'm sure you can appreciate the importance of long-term thinking, which is exactly what the SDGs are about. Around the world, there is a growing recognition among the business community that considering environmental, social, and governance factors is not only good for the world, but is good for the bottom line as well. At the United Nations, we understand that we need to work in partnership with the private sector to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. For business, this means shifting perspective, from narrowly focused on short-term results to strategically focusing on long-term value for future generations. The rewards of this approach promise to be significant. A recent study found that achieving the SDGs could unlock over $12 trillion in new market opportunities across just 4 sectors: food and agriculture, cities, energy, and health. These numbers are impressive, but they represent only a fraction of the benefits in terms of jobs, gender empowerment, peace and prosperity for all. For financial institutions, there are several areas where you can have a significant impact on our efforts to achieve a better world by 2030. First and foremost, naturally, is financing. help us to close the SDG investment gap by aligning your investment products and priorities with the goals. We need to spark massive new investments in areas such as infrastructure, green energy, and climate adaptation. The investments needed are of such a scale that they require an innovative mix of public, private, and blended financing. Second, in an economy like Nigeria's, the vast majority of businesses are medium, small, or micro-enterprises. Too many fall outside the formal economy. By offering inclusive financial products and services, you can help bring more entrepreneurs from the informal economy into the formal, domestic job market, and drive growth. Third, I urge you to invest in women, as studies have shown that it makes good business sense. Support female entrepreneurs to access credit and build businesses. Ensure that all women have access to banking services and can exercise control over their own finances. The dividends of women's financial empowerment are far-reaching, benefiting families, communities, and especially the markets. Fourth, allow me to make a direct appeal to everyone in attendance to take action, in partnership, to strengthen transparency, and to root out corruption in all sectors. For instance, illicit financial flows continue to rob Nigeria and many other nations of critical resources needed to build and maintain healthy communities and markets. I urge you to be relentless in your efforts. Lead by example and do everything possible in your own operations to deter illicit financial flows. It is important for achieving the SDGs, because crime and violent extremism require money to thrive. Ending illicit financial flows is also the only way we will put an end to the conflicts that hamper development in Nigeria and elsewhere. In that vein, I encourage those who have not yet joined to do so for the UN Global Compact. One of the most powerful contributions you can make to the 2030 Agenda is a commitment to ethical, responsible business leadership. Here in Nigeria, the Global Compact Network offers an important platform for companies from all sectors to work together in advocating for strong policies to support sustainable businesses. I thank those business leaders who are already active supporters of the Global Compact. I invite the Union Bank and all companies in attendance to join this important initiative. Let me close by offering my thanks again to Union Bank on your call to action. By embracing the SDGs as a business priority, and by committing to do business responsibly, I have no doubt that you can unlock countless new opportunities, create sustainable growth, and secure inclusive prosperity for decades to come. Thank you.
Speaking today at the Next 100 on the topic, The Business of Solving Poverty and Hunger, is the founder of Leap Africa, a leading youth leadership non-profit organization and co-founder of Ace Food Processing and Distribution, an indigenous agro-processing company. She was recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum and received a national honor, Member of the Federal Republic from the Nigerian government. She was listed as one of the 20 youngest Power African women by Forbes. Please welcome our first speaker, Ndidi Nwuneli.
It's a wonderful pleasure to be here today. I've been asked to speak about the business of solving poverty and hunger. In 2008, I was engaged by a large multinational that wanted to enter Nigeria. They wanted to introduce nutritious products, and so as a consultant, I traveled the length and breadth of Nigeria. I was shocked at what I learned. These statistics might appear normal and genuine, but the average Nigerian does not realize the depth of the hunger challenge we face. 30% of our children are stunted. And when they are stunted, this affects their brain development, which means that they cannot excel in their educational pursuits, they cannot gain employment, and they cannot live full and meaningful lives. 40 to 60% of our fruits and vegetables go to waste. And even though 60% of our population works in agriculture, we import 90% of the processed food we consume. We as a nation are facing a crisis of hunger and poverty, which affects our labor force, leading to up to 17% wage losses. And we lose 1.5 billion every year because we do not provide micronutrients to our children. Now, we also recognize that with the crisis in northern Nigeria, 4.7 million people are food insecure. Nigeria is literally draining our workforce and killing our future. Now, most of the reasons for these challenges are man-made. We have created them through corruption, through our inability to invest in fighting moderate malnutrition, through the neglect of our agriculture sector, which has resulted in low yields and waste, as well as our inability to invest in local processing. The sad reality is that even though our country stipulates that all manufacturers of oil, flour, sugar, and salt should fortify with vitamin A and iodine, only 2% of some of our companies do so. In fact, we have neglected the issue of hunger and poverty in our country. Why should our children suffer because of the changes that we have refused to make? I love this quote by Kofi Annan, which essentially says that a man is not free if he's hungry, because on a daily basis, he's focused on his next meal. Now, we see these children every day. We see them in traffic. We see them in our villages. We see them in our communities. They are nieces and nephews. Aisha in Gombe, Shegu in urban Lagos, Uche in Onitsha. They are separated from our children only because of opportunity and circumstance. But each of these individuals deserve to live full and meaningful lives. As someone who was really challenged to do more myself, I decided to start a number of companies with my husband, focused on addressing hunger and poverty. The first one is Ace Foods. Now, Ace Foods demonstrates the impact you can make when you source locally. We currently work with 10,000 farmers in northern Nigeria, providing them with microfinance, training, and technology support. Through that, we've empowered them and also the transporters who carry the produce, our own company that provides a warm meal and health insurance to staff, all the women who distribute our products, and then we've also empowered the retailers at the back end, from farm to fork. The sad reality is that most manufacturing companies in Nigeria do not source locally and do not have any incentives to source locally. In fact, all they really use are the human beings who package the imported products that we bring into our country, neglecting the lives of our farmers who deserve access to better livelihoods for their children. Through our work, we've also invested in fighting moderate malnutrition, and we provide complementary food, soya maize, fortified with vitamins and minerals. Now, as a classic example of the impact we've made is that a few years ago, I visited an IDP camp in Abuja and met a young baby, Fatima. Fatima's family had been affected by Boko Haram. They traveled from Borno and ended up in the IDP camp outside Abuja. Fatima weighed 5 kg. She was 7 months old. 50% of the birth weight that she should have. A simple bout of diarrhea or fever would have killed Fatima. There are many Fatimas everywhere. By eating our soya maize, Fatima's life was transformed. The sad reality is, even though we can provide soya maize in Nigeria, we still import tremendous amounts of food from the World Food Programme, supporting farmers in other nations when we should be feeding our people with the food grown in our country. Through the Nigerian Dairy Development Program, we're putting farmers into clusters in partnership with Friesland Campina and LNZ. And this demonstrates what private sector-led development can achieve. These two companies have said, instead of importing all the milk that we consume in this country, we're going to source milk from Fulani for our herdsmen. We're providing training to the farmers. We're giving them support with artificial insemination, access to feed and fodder, and empowering the women, because the women actually control the sale of milk and the men own the cows. This is not only reducing the conflict between some communities in Oyo State in terms of settling our Fulani herdsmen, but it's ensuring that we can displace the imports of milk and empower our generation with nutritious food. Beyond dairy, we're also working in a range of areas, transforming value chains. Now, one of the biggest hindrances to agricultural sector is the fact that our yields are too low in Nigeria, and we cannot compete with globally sourced food. So we're introducing seed systems in yam and cassava, ensuring that we can triple or quadruple the yields that our farmers generate and have enough food for our people to eat. Beyond access to yields and technology, we're also providing microfinance through our sister company, Sahel Capital Agribusiness Managers, which manages the fund for financing agriculture. Financing remains a key challenge, and organizations such as Sahel are providing private equity to agro-processing companies across the country. Now, these are just examples of what you can do if you want to solve problems. And beyond my own personal engagement, there are lots of companies doing their own parts. We have Farm Crowdy that's providing opportunities to link individuals to farm produce. We have Chowberry that's actually using technology to ensure that expiring food gets into the hands of those who need it at much reduced rates. And Hello Tractor, that's really the Uber of tractors in Nigeria, providing low-cost tractors to farmers, ensuring that we have mechanization and increased yields. All of these interventions demonstrate that there's success stories in our country, but most of them are operating at very small scales. Union Bank has also been supporting Leap Africa through our Social Innovators Program over the last 5 years, ensuring that young people who have innovative ideas to solve hunger or poverty are empowered to do so. Safer Mom and On Fire are just two examples of innovative inventions that young people have introduced into Nigeria to transform the lives of people and ensure that we can have food for our people. Now, of all these initiatives, we've seen the statistics. By 2050, Nigeria is going to have 450 million people. How are we going to feed them if we cannot feed the 180 that we have today? It's going to take courage, it's going to take vision, and it's going to take innovation at scale. And that is required from every single individual sitting here. When we think about the two SDG goals associated with poverty and hunger, SDG Goal 1 says that we must solve poverty for all, means that we need to get everybody out of poverty. And that requires a trickle-down effect, that even if our economy grows, we have to ensure that no one is left behind. The hunger goal says that we have to unlock the opportunities in our agribusiness sector and ensure that we provide available, affordable food for every Nigerian. Now, these goals sound daunting, but with a vision, we can accomplish them. I actually really like the 2016 Agriculture Sector and Food Security Nutrition Strategy that the Nigerian government and the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, working with GAIN and FAO, have come up with. And I think it gives us a good blueprint to think about. Union Bank has stipulated 100 billion over the next 100 years to address some of these SDG goals. When you look at this chart, you can see a few examples of what we can use that money for. The need to address the issue of post-harvest losses means that we have to invest in processing. They've estimated 20 billion naira required for that, and they have an elaborate program that they've developed. Similarly, for production, increasing the yield so that we have more affordable and available food. Changing behavior so that we can address some of the myths. For example, Kano grows most of the cowpea we consume in this country, and we call it beans in Lagos, ewa, here. But they do not eat it as much in Kano. That's just one example of saying, what can we do to create innovative food for our people so that those who are growing the food are also eating the nutritious food across the country. Similarly, only 17% of our women currently breastfeed their babies, relative to 50% in other parts of the world. Changing our mindsets and creating awareness of the need to breastfeed our babies is critical to addressing the challenges around malnutrition. So I am suggesting that we think about some of the plans that are already in place and we empower our citizens to rise up and provide food for themselves. When I consider the future that we as Nigerians need to build for ourselves, I strongly believe we need to leave a legacy of vision and action for future generations. This requires that everyone in the private sector devote finances their treasure, their time, and their resources to charting a course for the future. It means that we're going to have to leave our egos and logos at the door. Even the banks sitting in this room can partner with Union Bank to change this country. And realizing that it doesn't matter whose brand is at the front. What matters is the impact for future generations. Now, I would like to end with this quote that I love by Nelson Mandela, which says, "Overcoming poverty is not a task of charity. It's an act of injustice. Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It's man-made. And it can be overcome and eradicated by actions of human beings. Sometimes it falls on a generation to be great. You can be the great generation. I believe we can be the great generation." The story of the Aishas, the Sheguns, the Uches, young children who are born into poverty and can never achieve their highest potential should not be told 100 years from now. Our children, our grandchildren will hold us accountable for what we did not do to transform this country. It's within our grasp. The strategies are there. The organizations that are doing it are already there. They need to scale. They need your help. My favorite quote says, "If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others." Union Bank wants to go far. They've called us together to do it together. And we need everybody here to commit to solving hunger and poverty in our lifetime. Thank you very much.
Speaking today at the Next 100 on the topic, "Who will teach the future?" is Managing Director of the Education Partnership Center, TEP Center, and a policy expert specializing in public-private partnerships in education. Please welcome Modupe Adefeso Olateju.
It's not moving. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I greet you good morning. It is still morning. So, in September 2015, we as a country agreed that under the auspices of the SDG 4, we were going to commit to providing inclusive, equitable, and high-quality education to every child that calls himself a Nigerian child, regardless of whether he lives in an IDP camp in Maiduguri or whether he lives in a palatial structure in Ikoyi, and that we will do this by the year 2030. And today, in a few minutes, I want to explain how it is that the teachers of today cannot get us into that future, and why a significant investment in teacher development can no longer wait. But first, please indulge me and come with me on an imaginary journey. I tend to live in my head a lot of times. Please come with me. So this is the scenario. You've saved up for 10 years to buy your dream car. You've worked and toiled and labored, and visions of this car have filled your mind and propelled you to work even harder. And finally, you can afford that car. And this is the car. It's the Aston Martin 177 with a price tag of 1.4 million US dollars. It's a beautiful baby. And right now, it's making its way to you. You've paid $250,000 to freight this car, and it's coming into the country. So naturally, your mind turns to, who's going to maintain this car for me? And you have two choices of auto mechanic. Your first choice is a guy you're going to see very soon on the screen, this man. And your second choice are those guys that are option B. So just by a quick show of hands, who might want option A to maintain that car for them? Just a quick show of hands. I didn't think so. What about option B? How are those guys faring? Maybe? Yeah, that's kind of like what I thought. Because after spending 500 million naira on a vehicle, woe betide me to give it to that guy who is option A, to maintain it for me. Now think about it this way. If for a vehicle, because at the end of the day, that's what it is, a vehicle, we are willing to invest so much to ensure that it is maintained and well taken care of, then how is it that for something that is far more valuable, far, far more precious, a child, we're content for them to receive any kind of education? It doesn't have to be high quality. Let them just go to school. It doesn't matter what they come out with. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not acceptable. So, a question that a lot of people ask is the teacher really important in this equation of schooling? How important really is the teacher? Now, I love this quote because it's the truth. It says that in a completely rational society, the best of us would be teachers, and the rest of us would have to do something else, like be neurosurgeons or astrophysicists, bankers, those sorts of low-level things, you know? But that's the reality. And in addition to this, sometimes people ask the question, you know, what sort of teacher is able to take us, you know, into the promised land? What sort of teacher is able to help us achieve the vision that we want for our future? I say, before we even ask that question, we must apprehend who it is that is teaching the present. Now, some of these statistics are going to be very worrying. Let's take Kwara State, for example. In 2008, there was a teacher development needs assessment conducted in Kwara State, and 19,000 teachers were assessed. They were assessed on their ability to teach children who were effectively 10 and 12 years old. And so one of the tests involved them being able to correctly mark the scripts of children in primary 4 and primary 6. And those are the results. I'll break it down. 75 teachers out of 19,000 were actually able to score 80% and above. 29% of teachers, 5,774 teachers scored 40% and above. Remember, these children are 10 and 12 years old. Surely the situation has gotten better. Surely. In Kaduna State, this year, 33,000 teachers were assessed. Very similar tests. The results, 66% of them failed. Now, you see, it's important to go back to ask the question, where are these teachers actually coming from? These teachers who end up in the classrooms, who take these sorts of assessments and come up with these sorts of results. Data, we know, we've traced it for many, many years. And what we found is that university admission requirements consistently require higher cutoff marks than for colleges of education and even for degree programs in universities. And I'm a product of a degree program in a Nigerian university. And I know that I was always a second-rate student in school, at least in people's minds. So in reality, what are we doing? We are actually systematically channeling the least able people into the sector, speaking generally. Okay, so moving on. People then ask, that's the past, we're talking about the future. So tell us about the teacher of the future. Well, the first thing I will say is that we don't know the future. Not in this digital age. A lot of the jobs we're doing today are fungible. They're not going to exist in 20 years. By the time we achieve 2030 and the expiration of the SDGs, who knows what the robots will be doing? So we don't know what the future holds. However, we do know that if we're going to prepare children for that future that is unknown, we're going to have to do two things. The first thing is we're going to have to teach them how to learn and understand why it is important to love learning. They will need to learn how to learn, and they will need to love learning. What kind of teacher will help us achieve that? Well, these are some of the characteristics. That kind of teacher will be cognitively sound. That kind of teacher will be skilled, will love teaching, will be motivated, will genuinely care for children, will be inspiring, and will be flexible in their own professional practice. So, how do we get these teachers of the future? Well, I have 3 thoughts. First, we need to identify potential teaching talent, and we need to start to do it now. It is important for us to begin to ask ourselves, what sort of people do we want to teach our children? When I get into a classroom, I want to see a teacher that looks like me. I don't want to see a teacher that looks any less than me. So we need to find where those people are, who have those cognitive abilities and who have that passion, and we need to bring them into the sector. Secondly, we need to focus on pathways, creating these pathways to ensure that they actually do come into the education sector. And we may need to begin to explore alternative pathways to bring talent into teaching and ensure that they are embedded in the civil service, but they are not necessarily constrained by the civil service. Thirdly, we need to ensure that when they come in, they actually stay and they don't run away after 5 years. We have to provide them with opportunities for individual and peer learning opportunities. We must ensure that they have facilities and resources at their disposal. We must ensure that we help them to take pride in the work that they do and support public relations campaigns to actually change the face of teaching in Nigeria. I think these are very important things that we can do. And there are examples from around the world of people who have done similar, and indeed there are examples from Nigeria of people who are working very hard to help us to find those teachers. And these are some examples. Now, Finland tends to be the blue-eyed boy of teacher development and indeed of education. For several years, they dominated the international student assessment rankings. And what did they do? Lots of people flocked into Finland to understand what they did. And they did 3 very interesting things. The first thing they did, and this is very interesting, they didn't actually just focus on bringing in the highest performers into the sector. They brought in the highest performers and the average performers. And then they designed an incredible teacher development program so that it didn't matter whether you were a musician or you were an artist or you were a scientist. If you were truly passionate about teaching, you would find your place within the sector. And thirdly, they paid them. They paid them well. They gave them a good salary so that at least they could have a decent life. In Africa, we have an example like Jika Mfundo in South Africa. And what they're doing is they're helping teachers to collaborate, to support each other, to learn together, and to grow together. And they have the support of the teacher unions. They have the support of the government. They have the support of the private sector. In the first instance in Nigeria, we also have a program called Corona I Teach, and we have an initiative called Teach for Nigeria. And they are working very hard to help us identify excellent young people and bring them into the sector and help them to think through how they can stay in the sector. In the second instance, we have an interesting initiative called the Teaching Network Foundation. And what they have done is to create an online community of practice. And so teachers are not being trained by professors in the ivory towers. Teachers are being trained by teachers. They're learning together, they're growing together, they're sharing together. And that community is thriving day by day. In addition to this, there are also very interesting initiatives like Gidimo and Co-Creation Hub's Relearn Center, and they are really, really breaking the mold. They're using technology, and they're disrupting the teaching space. And they're helping teachers to improve on their knowledge and their skills using technology. A model that I find very interesting, and which is very relevant to us here in Nigeria, is that which sees donors pooling their resources and focusing on one big thing. And a good example is actually something called the SIPSI. The SIPSI represents the Partnership to Strengthen Innovation and Practice in Secondary Education. And they are a donor community pooling their resources, and they're trying to address one problem, and that is girls' secondary education. So we do have examples of what people are doing from Nigeria and internationally, and we can learn from these examples and scale them systematically. So let's bring it back. Let's bring it back to us. Most of the people in this room are private sector. Most people in this room are private sector. So what can you do? What can you do to help us find these teachers of the future? I love the number 3. I have 3 suggestions. 1, focus on one thing for God's sake, not on 20 different things. If we're going to focus on this one thing, let's do it well. How about establishing something called, I don't know, maybe the Private Sector Teacher Development Collaborative? And then we all pull our resources and we focus. We know that teachers are the most important school level variable. Indeed, if you take students and you put them under a tree and you give them a great teacher, do you know they will learn? So why don't we just put our money into teacher development and disrupt that space completely? So let's do one thing. Let's focus on identifying and retaining talent in the education sector. 2, invest in evidence. Please don't do things because you dreamed of them and then decided it's great to implement. Invest in evidence. Let's learn what works. Take a few risks. Put your money on pilot programs, on larger programs, on programs that you feel may make a difference, but which you are studying and tracking and learning so that we can understand whether they work. And if they do work, we begin to explore how we can scale them. Thirdly, do not run away from public policy. It is so important that the private sector has a seat at the table when policy is being determined in this country. It is imperative. And when we begin to think about structural issues, like how it is that we're systematically channeling the least able into the education sector, it becomes incredibly important that the voice of the private sector is heard in that discourse. So, I'm wrapping up, and I started out by asking you to dream about an Aston Martin and about buying it. But I'm going to end by saying, scratch that. Can't we just build this car? If we can build it, we can export it, we can keep the 1.4 million in our pockets, and we can grow as an economy. Well, you see, it seems a bit of a wild idea, but the truth is that we have talent in Nigeria. We have people like Jelani Aliyu, who actually designed an award-winning electric car in the United States. You know, the car he designed is called the American Revolutionary. Isn't that interesting? Not the Nigerian Revolutionary, the American Revolutionary. And guess what? He's back in Nigeria, and he's helping us to solve some of our challenges in that sector. So we have the human resources, and we can begin to work strategically to achieve these objectives. But you see, behind every Jelani is actually an inspirational teacher. And so I'm going to end on this quote. It says, "The mediocre teacher tells. The good teacher explains. The superior teacher demonstrates. The great teacher inspires." Those great teachers exist. They exist in Nigeria. But until we collaborate, we put our resources together, we focus on one thing, and determine that we will achieve it, we will not find that teacher. So how about working together from today to help us find those teachers and embed them in Nigeria's classrooms? Thank you.
To my mothers, may you never have cause to shed water from the wells of your eyes in sadness over me. May the tears and sweat that you have shed carry me to the port your prayers have ordained as my destination. When I was growing up, one word that stood in the way of me and my destiny was wait. When I asked my father, why is it that my brothers are in school and I have to stay at home to cook and clean? My father replied me with stern wisdom, and he said, wait. When I asked my mother, why is it that my sister has been married off before I can appreciate her and thank her for always being there for me? My mother replied me with a knowing nod as if she was tipping a heavy load from her head, and she said, wait. When finally I was sent to primary school, at an age I should have been in secondary school, I didn't ask why. My anger was doused by the waters of education, and I was grateful for the opportunity to sail this boat into my future that I forgave my father for making me wait. At school, I scored the highest mark at the entrance exams, and everyone congratulated me. My teacher, Mrs. Sikoke, she told me that the sky was the limit, and I could not wait to hold that admission letter in my hand. But on this occasion, the headmaster decided that second place was higher than first place. Why? Mr. Headmaster, why? He told me that I was rude, and he told me to wait outside his office. And there he came, and he caned me, and he sent me home to my parents. When I got home, I told them what had happened. And my father, he put on his shoes, and off we went. Oh, the joy I felt in my heart that my father was standing up for me. And I kept on saying to myself, Mr. Headmaster, just you wait. When we got to school, he bent his head in shame, and he groveled an apology for my behavior. He said he did not know who gave me the idea that I was going to continue my education, and that like my sister, I will be married off, and he had already accepted my bride price. He told me, do you need a certificate to pound yam? Do you need a certificate to attend to your husband's needs? Do you need a certificate to bear children? Kneel down. I will deal with you for disgracing me. He made me beg that man who was standing in the way of my destiny. On the way home, I made a decision that no one will stand in the way of my destiny. When we got home, my mother's silence nearly broke me. Not a word, not a single word from her. Finally, she came to me and she said, my dear child, I want you to have opportunities. I want you to have choices. And then she put some money in my hand. And then I knew what I had to do. So I waited for night to fall, and then I ran away. I ran away to the city where my sister lived with her husband and 3 children. I didn't know how she was going to accept me, feeling the way she must have felt being robbed of an education. But my sister welcomed me with a smile and a big hug. I thought to myself, do I take in her sympathy and tell her what I really wanted? Or should I wait? No, I'm not waiting. So I begged her, and I told her that I will look after the children if her and her husband sent me to school while they were at work. She said she had to clear with her husband. What if, like all the others, he told me to wait? I can't. I must go to school. They deliberated in their bedroom in what seemed to me as an eternity. And everything just played in my mind, going back home, getting married, not fulfilling my destiny. No, I have to go to school. But she came back and she said, yes, somebody praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. So, it was my first day of school. I picked up my bag, put on my uniform, and I headed for the door. And then I heard somebody call out, wait! Again? No. So I went back, sister, and then she said to me, these are my words to you for now and for the future. When you get to school, do not lower your voice in class. Don't hide your courage and your strength. Be you and become what you will become. And don't let anyone, not even me, stand in the way of you and your destiny. Oh, sister. This time, I picked up my bag again and I stepped through the door. I did not wait. And I became every girl and every woman who is winning in Nigeria. I did not wait. This is my time. This is our time. And we will not wait. And we will not wait. And we will not wait. Thank you very much.
Speaking today at the Next 100 on the topic, The X Factor, Winning with Women, is a youth advocate and partner at the Firma Law Practice. She has advised clients locally and internationally on intellectual property, banking, project, finance and asset acquisition.
Also speaking today on the topic, The X Factor, Winning with Women, is the head of the Africa program of the Open Society Justice Initiative and the immediate past chairman of the National Human Rights Commission. Please welcome Chidi Odinkalu
and Saadatu Hamu.
Can I and my colleague join in congratulating Union Bank on 100 years of outstanding service and investment in our people. My sister here is Saadatu Hamu. She is a social justice advocate. I've learned a lot from her, and I suspect you're going to too. Just listen.
Good morning again, everyone, and congratulations to Union Bank for building an institution standing 100 years and more to come in a country where we build individuals. The future must not be left to chance. It must be deliberately and intentionally designed as it ought to be. I will tell you a personal story. Early this year, I made a career leap. And on my last day at work, where everyone tells you nice things about you, or not, Naziru, my colleague, who was the last to speak, said emphatically, Fali is hardworking. She works like a man. From the bottom of his heart, Naziru was giving me a compliment. He's a great guy, but that was his understanding of success. His understanding of success did not have someone looking like me, female, northern, Muslim, in an office, and at that, leading. Not only Naziru views success of women this way. Many men in Nigeria understand success to be not inclusive of whom I don't only share physical similarities with, but I also share the title, girl, woman, never dared to be king. I will go back to my university. There is the Law Students Association in my school. The office of the president of the association is reserved for a 500-level student male. And the office of the office of the president is reserved for a 500-level student male male student, and the office of the vice president is reserved for a female student who is in her 400 level. You see, this is a youth-led and student-led organization that have designed their rules that I too can win, but not more than them, or not more than a selected few. That is the reality we are living in this world. You see, it may not be easy to change laws, but we must consciously and deliberately change the mindset that design the rules and laws that govern society. I left that system over 5 years ago, and that is still the norm. And maybe that norm and unwritten rule has become even more commonplace and more powerful than some laws in the school. We are in a country that we are continuously and deliberately, socially, economically, and politically excluding women, which what it only leads to is economic impoverishment. And you cannot discuss economic impoverishment and not discuss literacy, because they are completely tied to each other. In Bauchi State, 89.2% of girls cannot read and write. And when I move farther away from where I call home, I come to Lagos, to Ondo, the median of boys and girls reading is at 82.9%. So are we building a system designed for us to win? Or are we just creating lip service? I now invite my mentor, my brother, Chidi, a former lawyer and now a citizen.
Thank you, Pali. But that really is the point, that a lot of our sisters are not citizens. And you cannot build a country without citizens, nor can you build an economy without consumers. For around this country, you hardly have women who are citizens or consumers. And why is that so? Because we're a country comfortable with being nasty to women. If you're a woman, it's a difficult place to grow up or live in. Nigeria, you can't be, and you're not in being. Why and how does that happen? I'll tell you a story. I've got a young colleague, just under 30, her name is Joy. Joy went to take a cab in Abuja last Friday, last Saturday, and what happened? She entered the cab, the driver agreed to take her, and then a guy walks up to her, barely a little older than her, not offering more money than she did, and told her to get down because he wanted to ride in the same cab. She had to get down. Why? Because he's a man entitled. Joy is a young woman, and she cannot be in the same space with this guy. They were paying money. And that's the only thing. Now, it doesn't just happen to young women trying to enter a cab. I went to a dinner with a much older colleague, a senior colleague at the bar in Lagos earlier this year. And I was asked at the hotel to register her in order for her to enter the hotel. Why? Because she's female, and when a woman goes into a hotel with a guy, they only go there to do one thing. Now, you see, that is the problem, because if you're female, you're not an economic actor in our system, you are illicit. Now, that idea of making our own fellow citizens illicit is what we are here to talk about, because it's got consequences, and there are reasons why we cannot win with women in a country in which even women are not allowed to be or be in being. What are those reasons? I can deal with a lot, but I just want to concentrate on 3 at the moment. There's a patriotic reason, a nation-building reason why we have to get women working and in action. And why is that so? Go back to our national anthem. 2nd stanza. How does it end? In love and honesty to grow. Sing. Sing, please. Just and true. Continue. Wonderful. a nation where peace and justice shall reign, in love and honesty to grow. You cannot love if you exclude half of your population. Nor can you have justice where you exclude half of your population. And in Nigeria, we love where we come from. And we may disagree and quarrel over a lot of things. We fight over a lot of things. But you know what? We love our country. We love our Nigerianness. To build a country requires recognizing that women have a role. It is called motherland. And there's a reason we call it motherland, because all of us come from one place. We come from our mother's womb. Correct? Because we come from our mother's womb, therefore, we've got to make women work. And that takes us to the second reason. It is smart investment when women are working. When you look at the numbers of financial exclusion in Nigeria, they are daunting. Barely, about 35-38% banked, and that means most of our population is unbanked. Over 60% of that unbanked population is female. Now, the women also in the rural areas where they provide most of the labor, over 67% of the rural population is female. So we are growing a country of two halves. One small of mobile people who are able to talk about robotics, AI, and all of that, and the vast majority of women whom we don't want to develop. For bankers and investors, that is an asset base. We have a self-interest in putting resources in. Because when you do so, your bottom line does what? You will see it rise. But you don't just see it rise. You will see the country grow. Women also grow the food that feeds the country because they are the workers that work the farms in the village. That means what? If you put money in women, whether as workers or as investors or as anything, you're supporting the family. You're supporting another generation. You are feeding the country. You're making the women work, and you're making money doing it. Why can't you do it? Now, there's a third reason. When you invest in women, everybody gains. And life expectancy grows for everybody. Look at the equality stakes across the world. The most equal countries have the longest life expectancy. Sweden is the most equal according to the Oxfam Equality Index for this year. Men can live up to 81 years in Sweden. In Nigeria, men will only live up to 51 years. In Namibia, which is the second most equal country in Africa, men can live up to 62 years. There's a differential of 10 years between Namibia and Nigeria. Why is that so? Because Namibia is more equal than Nigeria. In those 152 countries, Namibia is number 2 among African countries. Nigeria is dead last. That is the bad news. The good news is what? We can only get better. The only way for us to go is up. And that is why we need you to come along with us on this journey.
Financial inclusion, political inclusion, and they say, oh, we are not ready. Women have been born ready. We have always been ready, but it's time for you now to recognize that and join us in supporting women. As a bank, what can you do? As the private sector, what can you do in a country that 79% of the population is women? And we also have over 40% of entrepreneurs to be women. I recommend to you to have the X Factor Fund. What will that do? This is a fund solely dedicated for the advancement of women businesses, because once a woman is economically empowered, you can guarantee that her daughters will go to school, her son will go to school, and show me a bank with a fund dedicated to women, and I will show you a bank that is not only building for its prosperity, but building the nation's prosperity as well. It doesn't only make common sense, it also makes business sense. Research has shown companies and businesses that are more diverse and have women in leadership positions tend to perform better, tend to have more empathy. And I wonder, when we speak of financial inclusion, and for as long as I've been alive, the monetary policy of this country have always been decided by a man. When will a woman sit at that table? And when that happens, I can assure you it will trickle down to the policy implementers as well.
So, as we end, we've got a message for all of us here. We all, as my dear good friend Mufasa says in Lion King, joined in that grand circle of life. What affects the woman affects us. And that's why we are here together, because the Almighty made us male and female. And that is very important to recognize. And in so doing, when we say these things about making the woman work as an economic actor, a lot of people will tell us that is our culture. Well, there's no culture that fosters injustice, and culture does evolve. Or people will tell us, well, we've invested in gender sensitivity. Well, this is not about gender sensitivity. We're not asking you to pander. We are asking you to recognize self-interest and come with us on a journey. This is about gender sensibility. Because when we are gender sensible, not gender sensitive, gender sensible, when we are, the country wins. The family wins. The neighborhood wins. And who else wins? The woman wins. But above all, because we're here amongst investors, you investors will win too. You make more money. And you are in the business of making money. So, let's go become gender sensible, because when you do that, you will make more money. And over the next 100 years, let us invest in creating safe spaces for women, eliminate violence, fund things that make the space accountable, because when it happens, we will be a much better country, a much stronger country, and a country in which all of us, including our sisters, our mothers, our daughters, are all citizens and consumers and winners. Thank you, and may the Almighty bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
The next 100, a call to action. Speaking on the topic, Jobs of the Future, a case for creativity and vocation, is co-founder and CEO of WAVE, West Africa Vocation Education. Please welcome Misan Rewane.
Good morning, everyone, and congratulations to Union Bank on their centenary anniversary. Looking forward to the next 100 years of greatness. Random fact, my mom and my dad met while both working at Union Bank in the early 70s. So I have Union Bank to thank for being here. So when I was asked to speak about the jobs of the future, I couldn't help but feel a sense of imposter syndrome. Living and working in Lagos and having the opportunity to visit San Francisco, the home of Silicon Valley, once or twice a year, I tend to feel like I'm living in the past in Lagos and visiting the future in San Francisco. Casual conversations that people have about dining at fully automated restaurants where there are no people. Of course, the food is cooked at the back by people, but your servers, cashiers, all of that is digitally done. People have conversations about self-driving cars being a couple of years around the corner and are actually working on teams that are developing this. Or conversations about cryptocurrency being traded and rising in value, where I should have put my money. Conversations about smart homes and how people's personal assistants are actually artificial intelligence bots. So yes, I struggle to fathom what the jobs of the future in 5 years will be, or even the next 18 months. On my last trip, I had a conversation with a friend from business school, and she's a product manager and was in between jobs, so she's currently job searching. And I was struck by the variety of industries that she is thinking about. Everything from housing marketplace companies to ride-sharing companies to credit card processing companies, hardware, software, nowhere. She has options. Why? She explained to me that a product manager is the CEO of a product. They're the ones who decide what features the product should have, who the suppliers should be, how much it will cost, what's the strategy for getting it to market. And as she says, every company will always have products or services, and therefore product managers will always be in demand. Even back here, I got, when I was talking to a friend this weekend who's head of marketing at an FMCG company, and we were talking about artificial intelligence and how it's going to change digital marketing. Isn't he worried about the future of his job? And he said, no. As long as there are companies with products and services, you will always need creatives to think about campaigns to inspire people to want your brand and to be associated with it. And yes, artificial intelligence is going to help enhance his work, but not that he's going to be out of work. And so it got me thinking about a Jeff Bezos quote that I like. And Jeff Bezos says, if you're trying to build a successful and sustainable business, not this quote, yeah. If you're trying to build a successful and sustainable business, don't ask yourself what's going to be changing in the next 10 years that could affect your company. Instead, ask yourself what won't change and put all your energy and effort into that. I can't imagine a future where consumers will want higher prices and less value for their money. I can't imagine a future where somebody would prefer a more inconvenient product to a more convenient product. And so applying that same frame to the jobs of the future, I think it's worth asking, besides what's going to change in the future, where I think we spend a lot of our energy and effort thinking about as young people, what isn't going to change in the next 10 years? Whether we become 410 million by 2050 or not, the hundreds of millions of people in this country will continue to require 1 to 3 meals a day, which continues to signify the huge potential of the agriculture sector. And so how do we put all our energy and effort behind that sector? How do we become the next Netherlands, where they're innovating in precision farming, which I just found out what that was. It's how do you apply IT to figure out when the soil and the crop needs the things that they need to maximize the productivity. They have fully automated tractors. They have drones that are figuring out, okay, when is the right time for the pesticides to be sprayed, for the fertilizers, and are actually doing some of the harvesting. How do we invest in our talent? You have companies like Farm Crowdy that Ndidi mentioned earlier, that's financing people who want to be in agriculture, young people who want to get into the agriculture space. How do we find those sorts of innovative systems and start to invest in our talent to go into this industry that's not going anywhere in the next 10, 20 years and beyond? What's definitely not going to change is that the 200 million or 500 million people are going to need housing. And so how do we start to invest in this sector and build the skills of the artisans that need to get us there? And whether we end up leapfrogging, I mean, right now there are 3D printed houses. You can 3D print a house in 24 hours. That house will still need electricians and wiring, etc. And so where we decide to invest our energy and our effort to create more potential for these sectors that aren't going anywhere will determine the future that we create. Right now, there are people making clothing material from living organisms, from bacteria. Biocouture, it's called, to help us be more sustainable as we meet the clothing demands, which aren't going anywhere in the next 20 years. And the list goes on, from entertainment to leisure, to home care, to elderly care, to child care. Certain things are not going to change in the next 10 years. And so it forces us to think about how we create the future that we want. The best way to predict the future is to create it. So what does that mean practically? It means that for business leaders, if you think your business is going to be around in the next 20 years, investing in secondary education is not an option. It's a survival mechanism. And I don't mean the false dichotomy that we've created between secondary on one side and vocational on the other side. The job of every educator is to teach people not only how to learn to know things from textbooks and lectures, but to teach people to learn how to be, to discover who they are, what they're good at, what they're interested in and passionate about. And also as important is to teach people to learn how to do things. From the practical skills, learning how to build and fix and create things, to the more abstract skills, learning how to analyze information, gather evidence, negotiate, communicate, solve problems, work collaboratively. That is the kind of education that we need to be investing in as businesses. We have a 100-year gap between our education levels that our young people are getting today and what they are getting in the developed world. And so adopting a school in the traditional CSR format is not going to close that gap. We're talking about investing in hard skills, investing in soft skills. Let me go back. Don't worry, I know it off by heart. I just made the slides for you guys. So you don't have to look at my face the entire time. And so investing in skills training. How do we invest in our vocational skills training? I mean, the beauty of investing in skills training, I found it's hard work, what we do, but it's different it's less hard, as far as I'm concerned, than primary, basic, and secondary education. You see, the user in basic and secondary education is not the payer. You have to convince someone's parents to invest in their education. With vocational skills, the adult who you're training is going to invest in that because they're going to get a job and they're going to have income and be able to pay you back. And so that's why it's a different sort of challenge. And so how do we find models that are already doing that right now as we speak? You've heard of Andela, that's just raised, closed their 40 million Series C fund round, where they're creating the next generation of software developers. I don't know how many of you have heard of an organization called MITI-MEF that is training local artisans to use water hyacinth, which are fairly dangerous for the sustainable environment, to use water hyacinth to train, to create beautifully made handicrafts, furniture, accessories. There's a Street Project Foundation, little known foundation that is training unemployed young people in creative youth boot camps and putting them into the creative and performing arts industries. There's WAVE, where we find unemployed young people 18 to 35, regardless of whether they have a degree or not, and we teach them life skills and work skills that are going to be applicable across any industry and help them find entry-level work primarily in the services sector, where we find that you develop the skills that are going to help you be competitive in whatever industry because you're learning to manage yourself and manage others. And so how do we find these models that are working and are creating alternative pathways to careers for young people in these sectors that aren't going anywhere anytime soon? And how do we invest in them to scale them up? Every company, whether you admit it or not, you are a school. As Modupe said, who are our teachers? Our entrepreneurs are our teachers. 90% of the jobs in this country are created by SMEs. And so us SMEs are carrying the weight of the education system on our back. We are taking the young people and we're training them in our apprenticeship systems, whether we acknowledge them as apprenticeship systems or not. And so how do we formalize that investment? Every bank has its own academy and they're all unique and teach you very unique things. But at the end of the day, they're a very common set of skills that all of them need to know. And so how do we pool our resources together and become prosumers of skills, producers and consumers, working with the education system to teach the common skills that are going to be required to get us the productive talent that we need? And it's not CSR, it's things that are actually going to have a return on investment for us. Because remember, talent is the only thing that gets harder as a business grows. It's easier to raise funding as you grow. Talent does not get easier. And so those are very practical things for the business people to invest in. And then for the educators, we've talked about this. Let's refocus what education should be about. It should be about developing competencies and not about credentials. It should be about developing skills and not just additional years of schooling. And so we have to change the game there. And for us young people, what do we need to do? We need to also change the game, because the illiterates of the 21st century is not going to be the person who can't read and write, as Alvin Tofer, the writer, says. It's going to be those who do not know how to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so for us young people, we have to change the focus to be about lifelong learning and life-wide learning, not just in the classroom. In every element of life, we're learning the skills that are going to be required for the workplace. And so I think about a young man called Paul Anigoro who came to our program 4 years ago. He was part of our first cohort. He'd been through secondary school, had been through IT training, and was still struggling to make ends meet, to find steady and stable work. And so he came through our program, and we screened him in simply because of his willingness to learn, that important ability to learn and unlearn and relearn. And he learned these skills, how to communicate, how to solve problems, how to manage his time, how to work with others, digital literacy, how to negotiate. And then he realized the passion that he had for art and design and saw that the food industry could be an interesting place to apply his skills. So he gave it a shot. He actually got a job at a hotel in Ikoyi. Started off as a kitchen steward, washing plates, dishes, just to make enough money to go to school. 4 years later, Paul is about to graduate from Yaba Tech with a degree in arts and design. And he's found that in the food industry, he's learned about food presentation and how you apply art and design to food. And so he's on his way to becoming a chef. And so in the next 3-4 years, I may run into Paul, and he may have developed a new vocational interest based on the new set of jobs and opportunities in the future. But what's going to keep him competitive throughout life is that ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that is what we need to be investing in as companies. So I think I've been able to admit that I don't quite know what the jobs of the future might be. But what I do know is that the jobs of the future will be created by how we invest in today's assets, the young people of today. How we invest in their ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. How we mentor them. How we invest financially in their ideas and help them learn either through failure or through success, whether they become our competitors in the future or our future customers or our future collaborators. But we need to invest in the young people of today because they are the ones who will develop the jobs of the future. And so I'll close with a quote that I love from a man called Jeff Sandler, who's the founder of the Acton School of Business in the US. And he says that each child has a spark of genius waiting to be discovered, ignited, and fed. And it is the role of schools not just to be manufacturing productive citizens, to be filling office cubicles in the corporate world. No, it's the role of schools to help each child find their calling and how they will change the world. You see, the jobs of the future are no longer director, manager, analyst. No. They are creators, entrepreneurs, or even revolutionaries. And so I invite us to respond to this call to action, to create the future that we want. Thank you.
Speaking today at the Next 100 with a feature address on funding for good, partnering to scale impact and accelerate progress, is the Chief Executive Officer of Union Bank of Nigeria. He joined the bank in 2012 to lead its transformation following a $500 million investment by Union Global Partners Limited. Please welcome Emeka Emuwa.
You've all heard a variety of speakers talk about different subjects, things that they are very passionate about, things that will make a difference if we can get behind them, if we can support them, right? It will make a difference. Now, what I'd like to do is look at things and talk to you today from a banker's perspective. I'm a banker. It's what I do. It's what I know. It's what I love, right? So yes, education is fantastic. It's necessary. Health is necessary. We all have our passions. More than half of my life I've spent banking, right? When I say I've spent banking, not spent it in banking halls, but as a banker across Africa, right? Financing large organizations, small ones, medium-sized ones, individuals, countries, across the continent. It's what I've been doing for over half my life, the last 30 years. And one of the things that I've learned and I found is that when you apply funding well, we are able to build infrastructure for development. And if we build the infrastructure for development, that enables us to drive economic growth because we have wealth creation, we have employment, and we have business growth. Because if you listen to all the discussions today, right, there are plans, but what those plans need is funding. I'll tell you a little bit about Union Bank. Union Bank, we started 100 years ago as Colonial Bank, and then we became Barclays Bank, and then Union Bank, right? And at the height of our glory days, for those of you of a certain era, right, we're big, we're strong, we're reliable. In the last decade or two, we navigated a tough economic environment in the 90s. We came through consolidation, and then we came through intervention, right? That's the story of Union Bank. And when I came to Union Bank, when I was coming to Union Bank, I had the opportunity, I was given the opportunity about 5 years ago to lead this organization. And when I was pursuing that opportunity, the question to me was, why Union Bank? Why do you want to leave the comfort of a global bank to a local bank coming out of intervention? The answer to that lies in what Union Bank is about, what Union Bank was about and still is. I said we were big, we were strong, we were reliable, but Union Bank touches virtually everybody in Nigeria. Everybody in this room, I believe, in one form or fashion, whether it's in the past or in the present, has a relationship with Union Bank in some form or fashion. If it's not you, it's somebody who's sitting next to you. If it's not that person, it's somebody who's working for you, right? And I felt that Union Bank, it was possible to regain its lost glory and get on a path for the future. So what I was responding to when I look back was a call to action, right? I saw there was a call to action, and that was what I was responding to. Over the last few years, I'd say the last 5 years, we've spent time transforming the bank, turning the bank into what it is we'd like to see for the future. That's what we spent time doing. And where we are today is that we've come full circle. And having come full circle, right, we're saying we're 100 years old. We have gone through transformation, we have been reborn, right? So what is it that we are looking forward to for the next 100 years? What is our vision for the next 100 years? That's what we're talking about today, right? And we just said we would define our vision for the next 100 years, and that is to be Nigeria's most reliable and trusted banking partner. And how do you define trust? Trust is in everything that we do with our customers. It is in every engagement that we have with our customers. It is in the simpler and smarter solutions that we try to provide to our customers. It's not an easy one to do, but every day we will live by that, right? We will do everything we can to build your trust in us. So why are we here today, right? Why are we having this conversation today? Today is, again, for me, another call to action. Having listened to what everybody has said, right? Empowering women, educating children, eradicating poverty, there is a lot of work to be done, and there is a call to action. Let me look at things from, from a banking perspective. If you look at the banking industry, there are 30 million accounts, 30 million customers approximately, with 83 million accounts, so an average of 3 accounts per customer, right? So what you have is a situation where you have very overbanked customers on the one hand, and very unbanked and excluded customers on the other hand, as bankers, right, we spend a lot of time, a lot of money. We spend billions. We deploy incredible resources, right, to fight for each other's customers. That's what we're doing, right? We're spending time and effort, and present company included, right? We are trying to eat each other's lunch. That's what we're trying to do. So if there's a different way to think about how do we increase our customers, how do we increase our base, it's something I'd like us to spend a few minutes on. That instead of just looking at how we can take customers from whoever is banking them today by offering, yes, simpler solutions, smarter solutions, it works to an extent. But ultimately for all of us, if we can increase the size of the pie, we'll do much better. Because if you look at it, right, how do we bring in 10 million, 20, 100 million new customers into the system, right? And it's not just customers, it's consumers. How do we bring more consumers into this environment? Now, Nigeria has a lot of people. We're 180 million people. Some say we'll soon be 220, 200. Some say we'll soon be 450. I've heard very large numbers. But the reality today is that of the 180 million, 62 are poor. 62% are poor. 35% are either underemployed or unemployed. And only 7% of households have two income earners. Only 7% of all households. And we're 180 million and growing. So the question that I ask, and the way I'd like us to look at things, is how can we get more consumers created? How can we create more consumers? Because everybody would like to have more consumers, right? If you're selling oil, if you're a manufacturer of, soya oil, if you're a manufacturer, if you sell roofing tiles, you want more consumers. You want more people eating. You want more people consuming. You want more people buying your products, right? So how do we get more of the 180 million people consuming? How do we get more purchasing power into their hands? If we reduce just by half the amount of poverty in Nigeria, we will create over the next 3 years. If we do that in 3 years' time, we will create 60 million new consumers. Just reduce poverty levels by half. 60 million new consumers means 60 million more banking customers. It means 60 million more people buying the products from any of the manufacturers. It means 60 million more people looking for housing, 60 million more people wanting to consume services, 60 million more people with purchasing power is what we create. And then when we do that, the pie becomes much, much bigger. So what is our idea? What it is that we are talking about here today? If you listen to all the speakers today, it is a fund for good. How can we raise a fund that will fund all the activities from a private sector perspective that will eradicate those things that are limiting the number of consumers in Nigeria? One of the questions that we asked the speakers who have come up so far was, if you had 100 billion, 20 billion, 40 billion, what could you do? Would it make a difference? The overwhelming answer was yes. You listened to plans, you saw what could be done, and very clearly, from our own perspective, listening to the people that were up here, right, they have the execution capability. So what is missing is the funding gap, right? Remember, I said at the beginning, what I know how to do is banking, or what I do, right? Banking, finding how to fund financing gaps, right? So that's why we're talking about how do we generate a fund that, if we work together, we can accelerate the pace of development. Because if we attack the root cause of the low number of consumers, right, we will be able to create those new consumers. And looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, number 17, which talks about working together, if we all come together, right, private sector, whether in manufacturing, you're in banking, whatever it is, right, we're all doing things in our own little spheres, right? But if we collectively either find partners that have the same interest or come together, we will be able to make much more impact. Remember, what the speakers were saying is that things are being done, but we need to scale, and we need to scale up exponentially, right? And if we can achieve that, if we can achieve those goals, if we can eradicate poverty, if we can empower women, if we can educate children, if we can do all the things that we've talked about today, we will be able to bring in many, many more new consumers, and we'll be able to achieve prosperity, because prosperity is what it is that we want to achieve. The question is, all these ingredients, are they enough? If we have the plans and we can fund the plans, is that enough to achieve prosperity? It should be. But before we find out whether that is sufficient, I would like to acknowledge one of our speakers who unfortunately is not able to be with us today, this morning, Mr. Kola Ino. He was with us till late last night, but he took ill overnight. But I found out just before coming here, he's stable, he's back, but he was counseled to step down a notch because he was intent on still coming here, but he was told, dial it down, dial it down. So you hopefully get an opportunity sometime to listen to what he has to say, right? So, is funding the financing gap in all these plans sufficient to achieve prosperity? Is executing these plans sufficient to achieve prosperity? Or is there something else that we need? Do we need peace? Is there something else? To tell us what else it is that we need. We have with us, and I invite him to come up to tell us, we have an economist, we have a banker, His Highness Mohammed Sanusi II, Emir of Kano, to speak to us about peace and prosperity. No peace, no prosperity.
Good morning, everyone. May I recognize His Excellency Chief Ernest Shonekon and every other person in this room, and thank Union Bank for the honor of inviting me to speak on this occasion of their 100 years anniversary. Being obviously a former executive director and chief executive of First Bank, I kind of feel like someone standing in enemy territory. And the only reason I'm comfortable doing this is First Bank reached this landmark in 1994. So, you know, when I saw the letter inviting me to speak, the topic I was given was, there is no prosperity without peace. And I said, Emeka and his team would have sat down, racked their brains, as we say, for many hours, and thought, what topic can we give the Emir that can in no way be controversial? I mean, what can be less controversial than arguing that there can be no prosperity without peace? Which makes it very boring, right? Okay, so let me begin with a few disclaimers. I thought there were no politicians in this room, but I've just seen Governor Samini Turaki. But if there are any politicians, or he's an actuary, good, so he's an ex-politician. So my one disclaimer, and this is for all politicians, is that if I do not call you by name, I'm not talking to you. So if you think I'm... So if you think I'm talking to you, you're just thinking it. Okay, so now, I asked Emeka whether I was supposed to come with a presentation, and he said, no, just come and just say what you like, which is a very dangerous thing to do. But he's shaking his head, don't worry, I will not make Union Bank guilty by association. But you know, I'd like to just speak a little about some of the things we've heard today. And let me start with my sister. I'm sorry I didn't get her name, the lady who was on stage with Chidi Odinkalu. She did say that monetary policy has always been made by men. I had the distinct privilege as governor of Central Bank to have been appointed an honorary woman based on all the work that we had done for women in that time. And maybe we should take a step back and look at that and then see how we can build on that as far as the gender issues are concerned. You recall that in 2012, the Bankers Committee actually declared 2012 the year of the woman in banking. And we came out with a number of policy directives and initiatives aimed at closing the gender gap, both in employment and in access to finance for women. I remember we agreed that every bank would ensure that at recruitment, at least 50% of new entrants were women. We agreed that every bank would work towards making sure at least 40% of top management and board were female. I remember we started a process of actually documenting the number of women businesses that banks lent to. We set up a small and medium enterprise fund of 220 billion and said 60% of that fund would go to women. Within the central bank, we took deliberate steps to promote female directors. In the history of the bank, women had always been directors of human capital or directors of medical services. And by the time I left the central bank, we deliberately appointed very highly qualified and competent women to jobs that had been held by not just men, but alpha men. So we had the first female director of banking supervision, we had director of risk management, we had a director of internal audit, we had a director of branch operations, we had director of consumer protection, and the special advisor to the governor on SDGs. I think we had about 7 or 8 of the 24 directors as female. And believe me, those women did as well and much better than most of their male colleagues. But for me, you see, that's a starting point. And it's because I transitioned from the central bank to this role. And that transition entailed other forms of transition. And one of the most fundamental transitions I had was a transition from an economist dealing with numbers and graphs and equations to dealing with the human beings behind those numbers. It's one thing to talk about these figures. You know, I mean, Emeka has gotten up and talked about finance, and this is something we've all been guilty of, this mindset as economists and elite. In the central bank, I used to look at GDP growth, rate of inflation, the reserves of the Federation. And these are important numbers. And I measured prosperity in those terms. Now, is that prosperity? In 2015, and I'm not talking about Nigeria, take the whole world. In 2015, according to Oxfam, 62 individuals owned more than half of humanity. The wealth in the hands of 62 individuals was higher than the total wealth in the hands of the bottom 50% of the world's population. The 1% of the richest people in the world collectively own more than the 99% below them. So Emeka talked about the Gini coefficient. And you can think about that in Nigeria. In an era where we're growing, where we're producing billionaires and people going on the Forbes list and counting ourselves among prosperous nations. I actually had a situation where a famous politician who is unnamed said that a mark of the economic prosperity of this country was the number of private jets we had. It's the elite mindset. Now, let me tell you a story. When I became Emir, and this was within the first 6 months of being Emir, and every day I deal with these issues. People come in, some want help for medical assistance, some want support for education, some want food, and so on. And usually there's a time for those appeals after we've taken the communication from the districts. And on this day, while taking the letters from the districts, I heard this big scream from a lady who was waiting behind. And I said, go and check what is happening. And when they checked, they found that this woman waiting for her turn to ask the Emir for assistance, while waiting there, her baby died. And her baby died because she had come to the Emir to appeal for assistance. She needed 3,000 naira to buy drugs. Context, that is much less than $10. Now for me, coming from the central bank and being an Emir, I came face to face for maybe the first time in my life with what it means when we say X% of Nigerians are living on less than $1 a day. It means that for those people, their children die every day because they cannot afford 3,000 naira on drugs. 3,000 naira. They don't have access to antenatal care. They have no access to immunization. If they get malaria, that's a death sentence. Their daughters get taken out of school. 75% of adolescent girls in the Northwest are married. We have the highest rate of VV fistula in the world. I've heard this figure about 62% of Nigerians living in poverty. But just as you look at inequalities vertically, you must also look at inequalities horizontally. And I'm coming down to the question of prosperity and peace. 62% of Nigerians, or maybe 40%, depending on what you look at. But break down those numbers. In Lagos State, the poverty rate is 8.5%. In Zamfara, it is 91%. In Kano, it is 77%. In Yobe, it is 90%. And demographically, these are the most populous parts of this country. So think through those numbers and put human beings behind those numbers. And then ask yourself, how many Nigerians out of this 170 million are living on less than $1 a day? Where do they live? And is there likely to be peace and stability in those areas in the future? It's simple. Until we begin to think of economics, not in terms of GDP, inflation, reserves, but in terms of how many human beings are able to eat 3 square meals a day. How many young people have an education? How many people have an opportunity in life? We can never have peace. Nigeria is a country today with 170, 180 million people. The median age is 19. In the next 20 years, you will have at least 85 million Nigerians between the ages of 20 and 40. That is the population of Germany, the 3rd largest economy in the world. 85 million. What economy are we building for those people? And that's why when you think of all the things we've heard today, it comes back to challenging the way we've been taught to think about economics. And also challenging as bankers, and I'm a guilty person. I mean, I ran a central bank on the basis of classical neoliberal macroeconomic theory. I apologize for any damage I've caused. But the point remains, look at all the ideological conversations in the world which no longer happen. Take the debate on migration. We've all joined it. Migration is bad. Africans are migrating to Europe. Bad for who? Bad for Africans or bad for Europeans? When Africans were taught to migrate in the 17th century, held in chain and put in ships and taken to plantations to work as slaves, was that bad? When Europeans migrated to Algeria and Tunisia and South Africa and Nigeria and set up colonies and settler colonies and apartheid systems, that was migration. Why wasn't that bad? Don't we realize that Africans are migrating to Europe because of the world in which we have created? We've signed up global agreements. And Emeka would be a strong supporter of the free movement of capital across borders. Bring in capital and repatriate it. And I've been an ideological supporter of that. You're a strong supporter of free movement of goods and services across markets. Why is it so good for capital to move in and out, for goods to move in and out, for raw materials to go and finished goods to come, but so bad for human beings to go and share in the prosperity of those countries? Why is it okay for you to sit in New York and London and bring in X billion dollars into the Nigerian capital market, buy shares, buy currency, make profit, take it back, but bad for the Nigerians to follow that money and try to share in that prosperity? It's a conversation we must have. The global agreements we have signed, the ideology we have signed up to. We're playing a game. We say it's a level playing field. Fine. Take the Nigeria under-16 football team, put them on a playing field with the Brazilian national team. The field is level. Who wins? Who wins? You cannot have a level playing field when you sit down and sign up to agreements that were designed and fashioned by partners in an unequal relationship. So where to begin? And all of us are all living in this post-colonial mindset, is to begin to ask ourselves where, as Africans and as Nigerians, whether we're actually even thinking independently. And what will help us think independently is to continue asking that basic question in every economic statistic we look at, in every transaction we go into. How does this translate into the life of that human being? So even the woman that we're talking about, and I'm a very strong supporter of women's causes. And you know, I've spent all my life supporting women's causes, what I call elite women's causes. We have too many queen bees. How many of you who have become top bankers, top politicians, have actually done anything for those children who are taken out of school? Take our political life. All the debates that happen, governors seeking elections, presidents seeking elections, senators seeking elections, the topics that are discussed. Can you tell me, when last did you see a debate where politicians talked about what they are going to do about girl-child education, about forced marriage, about domestic violence, about the rights of women who are divorced and left with children uncatered for? And why are we surprised if on the streets of Kano or the streets of Zamfara or the streets of Sokoto we see child beggars when we allow their fathers to marry 3, 4 wives and have 22 children on an income that cannot support those families? And if they're on the street, why are we surprised that they go on drugs? And if they go on drugs, why are we surprised that they end up as radicalized individuals? So, continuing to discuss this in sterile statistics, Nigeria is growing at 7% per annum GDP. In fact, there was a particular year when I was governor where we all beat our chests, and clapped up for ourselves for having become the second largest economy or the largest economy in Africa, okay, through some mathematical abacadabra called rebasing of the GDP. We did not produce a single thing more. We just recalculated and computed, and suddenly we became the biggest economy in Africa, and we're happy. Not because we're producing more than we're producing yesterday, but because we had done some reclassification. So these numbers are important. Emeka, it's good to look at your bottom line, your profits. I'm sure you need to give returns to your shareholders. But I think for those of us who've been fortunate to work in the fields of finance, to work in the energy sector, for those of us who are in the upper middle class, well, I suppose I'm not middle class, I'm a feudal aristocrat, but for those of you, we need to ask ourselves, does this privilege not impose upon us a responsibility? The Chad Basin lost 90% of its water reserves. It didn't lose those reserves overnight. It lost those reserves over decades. Farmlands went waste. Desertification encroached. As far back as 2000, I did a paper in Cape Town, looked at the United Nations Human Development Indices, broke them down, and this is why I say we must look at horizontal inequalities. I broke these down and looked at them state by state. And I remember saying in that paper that if Borno and Yobe were a country of their own, they were poorer than Niger and Cameroon and Chad. But we didn't realize it. So why are we surprised that that area is unstable? We can't run away from the human being. And we can't run away from education. In 1978, when Deng Xiaoping started the opening up in China, there were maybe 30 million graduates in China, if at all. Today, China has more graduates than the entire population of the United States. 700 million Chinese were living in poverty in 1978. That number is down to 30 million. We talk about a Chinese miracle. We talk about an Asian miracle. Why is it a miracle? It's not a miracle. It's just about human beings doing what they needed to do. And saying that we are going to build an economy that takes care of our people. China goes to the table to negotiate World Trade Organization, to negotiate international treaties. When it goes to that table, it asks itself, what is good for China? Sorry, this is part of the... You see why I'm happy to leave the central bank. I didn't have this, nobody trusts. Anyway, so when we go for these events, when we sign these contracts, we should look between the lines and say, what is it that's going to bring benefit to the Nigerian on the street? And I think, for me, this is where we have failed. We have failed to bring economics down to earth. And economics can help us, even in the most difficult conversations we're having today. We have a constitution that says we must have a governor and a deputy governor and a state house of assembly in every state, 36 states. You have a president and a vice president and a minister from every state. You have 109 senators, over 300 members of the House of Representatives. You have 774 local government chairmen. In each local government, you have 10 councillors and a speaker. A retinue of special advisors and assistants, and you are surprised that you cannot pay salary? I mean, really, we are surprised that we're spending 80-90% of our revenue on public servants? That's the system we designed. So you want to have a conversation on restructuring? Let us have a conversation. How do you reduce costs of governance without amending this structure? Do we need 40, 30 legislators in every state? Do we need 500 legislators in Abuja? Must we have 36 ministers or more? This is a constitutional conversation. You don't have education. You don't have public health. We've seen the numbers. Infant mortality, maternal death at childbirth. Yet, the states and the local governments who are supposed to provide education and healthcare do not have the lion's share of government revenue. Let's have that conversation. It can be an intelligent dialogue. You don't need to shout Biafra or shout Boko Haram. Let's sit on a table. Let's talk about what works for Nigeria. At the end of the day, devolution is not about ethnicity or religion. Devolution or revenue allocation formula or whatever, it's all about bringing development to the grassroots. And it's a conversation that you should have. But when we cloak this in gender, in ethnicity, in religion, then first we lose the opportunity to make progress. And second, we reflect our own ignorance, because at the end of the day, if that is the problem, it will never disappear. If you divide Nigeria into 100 different countries, you will still have multiple ethnicities, multiple religions, and you have to divide those 100 into another 100. And how do you identify yourself? Emeka is a Kano man. We've been friends working in Kano. I don't know where Emeka comes from. I don't know. I don't think he considers himself as coming from anywhere other than he's just a human being. He's an individual. So let's change this conversation, and I'm hoping that as we talk about this economy and as we talk about, and again, this is not something that is targeted at any particular individual, but we need to think about the way colonialism has left us and the way we have voluntarily remained in a post-colonial mindset. The British came here and set up a colony. What did they want? They wanted raw materials and a market for their goods. We don't have the British today, but we're still exporting our crude oil to Britain and importing petroleum products. They don't even need to have colonial officers. We do it ourselves. We're keeping the refineries open. The largest export of the United Kingdom to Nigeria is what? Petroleum products. And we are an oil-producing country. So I'm happy somebody is building a refinery. I'm happier that the person is from Kano. But we need to have more. Why should we export cotton to China and import textile products? Why should we export our hides and skin and import shoes? And this is not rocket science. Ethiopia told the Chinese, gentlemen, come, what do you need to set up a factory here? They told them, they invited them, they set up a factory right there outside Addis, employing 5,000 people, producing shoes and bags and selling to Yves Saint Laurent and Gucci. And you know the leather in Kano is called Moroccan leather, the best leather in the world. Come and set up the factory in Kano. And the skin we don't sell, we sell to Lagos, pepper soup. We consume our own GDP. It's a delicacy. We've got to look at these things. And they're simple. You know, the Chinese didn't start building rockets. We're not talking about building computers, which is great to think about it, or building Aston Martin cars. No, please. Okay? Why don't you just turn your cotton into fabric, turn your fabric into garment and sell? Turn your hides and skin into leather, turn your leather into shoes and bags. And we used to do this centuries ago. 17th century, Kano was exporting shoes and bags, trans-Sahara, to the Arab world, $5 million worth in the 18th century. Economic history. 100 years of data on Nigerian trade before colonialism. In only 15 years did we have a trade deficit. What happened? What changed? Why is Ethiopia doing it? Why is Cote d'Ivoire doing it? Why is Ghana doing it? Why is Morocco doing it? We are the giant of Africa, a giant with clay feet. So we must first of all stop being in denial. And the way to wake up is to look not at the people in this room, because you do not represent Nigeria. We do not represent Nigeria. For every young northern Muslim girl like her, there are millions who did not even complete primary education. And they're walking around with wares, trading. They get married off without their consent. They produce children, they get beaten. After some time, they get divorced. And I'm talking about what I know, what I deal with every day. 4, 5 children. Somebody wakes up and says, I divorce you. Go home. Her father sent her, maybe the father, as we heard from Miss Graham Douglas, maybe when the father married her off, he thought he was taking a burden off himself, taking off one daughter. She comes back with a baggage of 6 that he did not produce, that he has to take care of, and his income has not gone up. Which is fine. But what is bad about it is that our system does not even see this as a problem, and the system does not protect them. Now, who is going to protect them? It's us. It's those of us who have been privileged to get this education, to give our daughters this education, to have our sisters with this education. We are the ones responsible for protecting those voiceless majority. And we have failed in that. And you know, today you go out in your car and they're hailing you. In 20 years, they will start carrying stones. Because those young people that you see on the street are going to be young men and young women without an education and without jobs. So you tell me there's no prosperity without peace? I say to you, there's no peace without prosperity. Thank you.
You've heard it all. Can we give him another round of applause, please? Well, I think we've heard it all. No peace without prosperity. No, it's no peace, no prosperity. Or no prosperity, no peace. Therefore, what we said earlier on, certainly what I said was, if we as a private sector can collectively work to attack the fundamental issues, poverty, education, empowering women, if we can do those things and more, right, we will be able to contribute to prosperity. And in contributing and creating prosperity, we create peace. We started here, at least I started here, talking about prosperity will create more consumers, and more consumers will be good for all of us, right? Manufacturers, service providers, banks. Well, yes, it's in my DNA. That's, yes, we think of things that way. But clearly, there's an even bigger objective that can be achieved. And that's why this call to action to raise 100 billion every year that we can invest in making prosperity possible and consequently peace possible is what we are asking everyone here and even those not here to commit to. Now, when we started thinking about this idea, right, we said, let's get a group of like-minded people, right, with shared goals, public and private. Let's get them to work together. But let's also try and identify somebody who can, shall I say, galvanize this group, right, that is independent, so to speak, right? Because yes, this is us, Union Bank, here in front of you. First of all, Union Bank is not putting 100 billion. I mean, we don't have. If we had 100 billion, we put it in. But we don't. But pardon? But what we're trying to do is provide the opportunity for everyone here to reflect and see how they can be part of that coalition. So we thought about this, and like I said, join us in the Next 100 Fund, which is a private sector-led fund to deliver the SDGs. So this is not, there are many people here who have finance hats, whether it's private equity, investment banking. This is not a fund to invest in the markets. This is a fund to deliver the SDGs. That's what we're looking for. And if we deliver the SDGs, we will deliver prosperity, we will deliver peace, and it will still come back as more consumers in a peaceful environment spending a ton of money, and they will need banking services. So it all comes back, it circles back ultimately. I'd like to say, first of all, a very big thank you to all the speakers. Everything, please give them a standing ovation, please. Let us give them a standing ovation. Without their input, we would not have gotten the insights that we've gotten today. I'd like to think that some people, that even the hardest-nosed capitalists in this room, and I see some of them shaking their heads, right? Because I know them. I know a few, right? Are saying, you know what, yeah, it makes sense. That's what I'm thinking, that's what I'm hoping. So thank you, speakers. Thank you very much. To everyone else here, and thank you, His Highness, for coming all the way, for, in particular, adjusting your schedule to accommodate us and staying with us the entire morning. Thank you to everyone here. I hope that we've had an opportunity to learn. I'd like to think so. And as we, at Union Bank, look at the next 100, like I said, we invite you, right? Walk with us the next 100 years. I don't think any of us is going to be around, but just in case anybody here is around in 100 years, at least you will, I hope you will think back to today and say, this is where it all began. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
We would like to say thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for attending the next 100.